Welcome to Making the Grade, where we look at the PFF grades from the Cardinals game that was. And this is not, happy Tuesday, but it's not as happy of a Tuesday as we had last week after, the really impressive game that the Cardinals had in week 2. But in week 3, we went up against the Lions and lost to them by a score of 20-13. It was a one-score game to a team that was in the NFC Championship game, a team that a lot of people think is one of the better teams in the NFC. So there's definitely some silver linings there, but there's definitely, some disappointment, frustration, and, some areas where this team struggled. There are a few areas where they weren't so bad. So we'll get into the grades. And, as I look in the grades, I think there's some very telling things. One thing that I just really noticed looking at them that I'll bring up, that I think was a really big key to the Cardinals' struggles, and we'll get into that. And we'll talk a little bit about Kyler Murray because, he's obviously the quarterback. It's such a, there's been a lot of talk about him over the last couple of years on social media and in the media. Anyone who, follows my content knows I've been a staunch supporter of Kyler Murray. I think a lot of the criticisms have either been unfair or at least overstated. Sure, he had some room to mature like everyone does in that age. But I think a lot of things were kind of overblown. You've heard me talk about that. But I want to get into his grades a little bit because I think some of the reactions to what was an off game for him have been kind of knee-jerk reactions. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Let me say hey to some of the folks that are here. We got Classy Nasty. Hola. Thanks for dropping in with the comment. We got Brett Jones. Let's beat Cliff. We got the Cliff Bowl coming up, right, against Washington Commanders. So this is going to be an interesting game. And, the Commanders – before they beat the Bengals in the way they did, a lot of people were looking at this like, oh, okay, this is a team we should beat. This should be one of those wins on the schedule, right? And I still think absolutely they're a team we should beat, but they're feisty, right? They are not necessarily an easy out, right? It's much like you could say for the Cardinals. So, and it's Cliff Kingsbury's return, obviously. So there's some interesting added sauce in that sort of matchup. So yeah, so hopefully though we can come out with the dub. We got Drew McWhirter. Thanks for being here. Happy Tuesday. We got Coley Jack. Thanks for being here. Evening, everyone. Mizaki Felix. Thanks for being here. What's up, Professor? Sorry about the loss. The defense is not a playoff caliber defense. Can't play the way they did and give up that many yards, et cetera, and be considered such. So the idea of a playoff caliber defense is kind of a tricky widget there, because what do we mean by that? Because that can be different things depending on the way the team overall is constructed. If you have a team that has a really good offense, then the defense the Cardinals have that gave up for as much as they got run over a bit, couldn't stop the run. This defense also only gave up 20 points to a really good team with a good offense. So if the Cardinals offense plays as well as it did the first couple of weeks, then no, this is a good enough defense to make the playoffs. But if you're defining a playoff defense as a defense that can carry your team with, maybe an offense that isn't great, it just depends. Like if you have a top 10 offense, then you need a middle of the pack defense gets you to the playoffs, right? Now, if you're talking about a team, a defense that can carry you through the playoffs, no, this defense isn't there yet. So it depends what we mean by that. I do think I actually was pretty encouraged by the defense. Yes, they ran on us a lot. But I think, giving up only 20 points, to the Lions is pretty good. And there were points they looked good. So it's not a great defense. They still need some new players, but I think but they've been playing better on defense than I expected. So I think it depends how we interpret that. And thanks for being here. Hoping we see Darius Robinson back in a week or next. Yeah, he's a rookie, so we got to see if where he's at. But he's out of position where they need some help. So here's hoping. Zach Felix, the defense to give average 27 points a game to play playoff. Do you mean playoff caliber teams? I don't know. I guess they gave up 20 to the Lions, and then they really that's kind of skewed by Buffalo. That's a really good team. So, listen, I'm not saying this is a great defense, but it's been middle of the pack statistically. And that's if this offense is still, listen, I know we just come off a loss and we only gained 13 points, and that's not great, but this offense has still overall been pretty good. It's, you have your ups and downs. We got to see how it goes over a longer, sample size. But I'm still encouraged by where this team's at, even with this loss. Jake Worley, thanks for being here. We don't have the middle of the pack defense yet. Statistically, they are. Talent-wise, I would agree that in terms of like the best talent is still too young. But statistically, in terms of what they did on the field, they have absolutely been a middle of the pack defense. The personnel is not middle of the pack. I would agree with that. There's some young players that once they develop, we might be closer to that. But statistically, they have absolutely been a middle of the pack defense in a lot of things. Drew saying, I really think two of four specific plays went 2 to 4 specific plays. Maybe is that what you meant? Went the other way on offense. We could have won the game. It was that close. It really was, right? Or if, yeah. Jake, kudos to Rouse and Gannon for, listen, they have coached up. And I talked about this. I think I tweeted about this, and I've talked about this before. Like, you can coach up a defense to some degree, right? If you have good coaching. Last year, this team did not have enough talent on the roster on the defensive side of the ball that you could even coach them up to being serviceable. They were really bad overall. They tried hard, but they just didn't have the talent. This year, they don't have like great defensive personnel. Like, they're not, they're still, bottom half, definitely in terms of defensive personnel, but they raised the level of defensive talent enough that this coaching staff has something to work with to coach up. Right. So it's, there's some nuance there, but the definitely the coaching staff gets a lot of credit. Right. I can see that. I still think it's 6-7 roster, in my opinion. We'll see. I mean, they do have a tough schedule. I think they can be better than that. I think if we got to see what the offense does. If what this week was this an anomaly, or is this, or was the last couple weeks an anomaly? Rafael Cancelo, thanks for being here. Hi, I hate my life. I'm so depressed. I need a new team. But listen, if you've been a Cardinals fan for a while, you've been through that, right? So it's, yeah. Drew saying the interior defensive line production has been equally as bad as last season. That's really holding us back 100%. Like, and we'll look at those grades. It hasn't been great. Paul, good to see you. Hi, everyone. So let's get into the grades. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball, as we always do. Okay. Now, the offensive grades, not nearly as good as they were last week, right? The best grade is Michael Wilson with the 77. That's not a great offensive grade, right? So let's look at this. So I always like to start out with the offensive line, and I'm going to jump into what I think is actually a thing that we probably haven't talked about enough, that I think is a big reason the Cardinals struggled in this game. Now, the overall offensive line grade, Paris Johnson Jr. had another solid overall grade, 69.4. Hernandez, 50.2, wasn't a great grade. Froholt had a solid game, was the best offensive lineman grade-wise. Brown had a little bit of a down game, right? We love that signing, but it wasn't his best game. And, the offense, the right tackles, Heck actually played reasonably well. Barton struggled, so obviously we're down to our third right tackle. But what I really want to point out here, and if you look at this, look at the run blocking grades. 56.4, 48.8. Froholt was solid, but 50.5, 48.4, right? Like the pass blocking grades, Hernandez struggled a little bit, but the pass blocking grades were a lot better, right, on that side. And if you watch the game, Kyler had time to throw the ball, but he also pressed the ball a lot. But I think the run blocking, and you look, James Conner, his running grade was 63.4. That's, average, right? But the run blocking, this team couldn't run the ball, right? If you look at the statistics, they had 77 rushing yards and 45 of those were Kyler, right? This is a team that ran for like 230 something last week, was it? Or 240 something. And this week, they couldn't get the running game going. And that to me, like, this is a team that is supposed to be a really good running team. And I think they talent-wise are, and that's going to be a big part of what they do. And I think the fact that they couldn't get things going with the running game put them in a lot more third and longs, and I think had them kind of playing, and they were playing from behind because they couldn't sustain drives with the run, and rely on Kyler a little bit more. And Kyler was pressing. Kyler had a bad game. Statistically, it's not as bad as some people are making it out to be, but he had a bad game, and we saw it. Like, there were the eye test showed you, there was the interception that was really bad. There were some other bad throws, some things he missed. It was not a good Kyler game. And I think Kyler has a tendency when he's pressing to make those mistakes, and that's something he's going to need to get better at, right? He also, though, sometimes in those situations has been really good. So it's kind of been hit or miss. But I think the run blocking and the overall ineffectiveness of the running game is a big part of this story that we need to look at in terms of why the Cardinals lost this game. I think if the running game had been better, Kyler wouldn't have been in a situation where he was pressing as much and he wouldn't have made as many mistakes. I get that you need him to not make those mistakes. This isn't an excuse, it's an explanation. I think that running blocking not being great and the running game not being great put this team in a situation where it was still a close game even with that, but they just really were trying to play from behind the whole time and pressing and made mistakes. So I think that run blocking, seeing how bad it was, really is very telling for what we saw there. So I think that's an important thing to look at. Let's get a couple other comments from some folks who have jumped in. Thank you for being here, Dana. A red feather report. Hi all, late, but at least I made it. Drew saying Giants, Minnesota, Seattle coming up will be the real test. Yeah, I mean, that's tough, right? Hernandez had an ill-advised penalty, right? Yeah. Dana's saying I need to finish the all-22, but it seemed like a lot more outside zone with slide right and left schemes instead of pulling that works so well for. So maybe they changed things up. Okay. I don't think they trusted Barton to be a puller pinner in the pin and pull. Okay, that's a good point, right? That like not having one of the people that they trusted really could be a part of that. It's one of those things where the grades tell you something, but sometimes there's these deeper stories where if they have a person who's a third stringer, some of the things that they really depend on, like, some of the pulling and kinds of blocking schemes, maybe they don't attempt some of those things that they normally would. And that ends up having kind of trickle down effects on the whole running game. So that's a really good insight there. Thanks for sharing that. Kyler had a lot of airmail throws, overthrew too many, very few passes in the middle as well. Yeah, so it was a bad game. I think that the running blocking, and I think Dana makes a really great point about with the right tackles, being in there that were backups, third string, practice squad, elevated guys. Yeah, I think it took them out of their game of what they like to do a bit, and they struggled to run the ball. And this is a team that ran the ball well last year, and I think that's going to be a huge part of the foundation of what they do. And so yeah, that's a really important thing to look at. Obviously we hope that they're going to have Beachum back, and if he does, hopefully that helps that for whatever you might think of Beachum. He knows what he's doing. He's been around for a while. And I think there's also the hope that, Barton, heck, over time, as they get a little more reps in practice in the system, maybe they get a little bit more, kind of better at the things they want them to do. You hope you don't have to play them, but but these are part of it, right? So I think that's a really important story to look at, though, in terms of that running game. So let's look at some of the other positions. So let's go with the tight ends, which is usually where we go next. Not the best game from our tight ends grade wise. Higgins had a decent grade. More in the passing game. His blocking grade wasn't great, which the blocking grades, pass blocking grades, weren't great for really for any of them. The run blocking grades were okay, right? Ryman, he's a rookie. He didn't have he had a decent run blocking grade, but he played on 20 snaps. McBride, didn't have his best game either, right? And then we get to the wide receivers. George, wasn't a great grade. Now Michael Wilson had a nice game, right? He was kind of the biggest part of the receiving game for a lot of this. Had a solid grade, right? 77.0. Chris Moore, just a few snaps there. Marvin Harrison had a nice grade, right? So 74. So it is encouraging to see, even though the overall result wasn't great, he had, that touchdown, right? He had 5 for 64 and a touchdown, right? So, look at his back-to-back games with good grades after that rookie or the first game, so that's maybe a little bit encouraging to see, right? Chris Moore, only on 3 snaps, not really anything worth noting there. So the receivers, we actually had a decent game from Harrison and Wilson, but when the running game not being anywhere in the tight ends, it's obviously that was too little, right? let's see. So then the halfbacks, let's look at those. Trey Benson only had 2 snaps, right? So Amari DeMarcado had 12. And that, I think, is not surprising when we look at it that, Benson has struggled with his ball carrier vision. DeMarcado has played better when he's played. He didn't this week. He didn't have a great grade, but he's getting more snaps. James Conner, didn't have his best game on 44 snaps, 63.8. Let's see. We have a comment from Drew here. I do wish PFF would show the snap numbers per grade in the number grade. That would be nice, right? You have to they do have the snaps over here. It'd be nice if they showed it over there, right? But this is the total, the play, the passing, the pass blocking, run blocking, right? So you kind of have to look over there, but it would be nice if it were there. Yeah. All right, real quick. Dennis saying week 2 versus the Rams, I saw Kyler make great reads and taking checkdowns. He was given when the deep ball wasn't open. Lots of forcing it deep to the lines. Yeah, I think so. And you wonder, like, he threw it so well deep. I wonder if he kind of got a little too into his, feeling himself a little too much there. I don't know. But then we look at Kyler, right? That brings us to the quarterback. His grade was 58.6 overall, 57.8 passing, 61.3 running. Right, there was a couple. I guess he had some run blocks on some of those plays. Right, 14 snaps to that. So this wasn't a good game for him, right? And let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's actually look at Kyler Murray. So these are his grades through for the first 3 weeks, right? And let's get over here. You see the grades, right? The touchdowns, interceptions, right? And then the grades. But then these things I like to look at, these big time throws and turnover worthy plays. I really like to look at those. I've talked about those before. He had one big time throw and 2 turnover worthy plays, right? So, far cry from last week where he had 6 big time throws and 0 turnover worthy plays. It's also, I think, worth noting time to throw, right? He had 3.3 seconds, 3.17. Today, this week it was 2.8. Some of those first 2 weeks, that was a very long time to throw. Now, a lot of that was him extending plays. He didn't extend as many plays, it felt like, for as long. And, so there was a time to throw was definitely less. He was only sacked once, right? So there's that. But, so that whether he was pressing it or not taking enough time, who knows? I mean, it felt like the pass blocking was decent, so I don't feel like he was being flushed too much. But, for whatever reason, there's that. But, so listen, this isn't a great game, okay? It's not good. It's a bad game. But I want to kind of talk about this a little bit. Because and before I get into this, I want to just point out, and Dan is showing one more thing I think was interesting. Next gen stats showing below league average separation this week, except for Higgins. So that matters too, right? If the receivers weren't getting separation, that also matters. Drew saying he didn't have a good game, but the tape doesn't look as bad as some people are making it to be. Yes, a few bad plays it out, but clean it up and it's a different story. I agree. So, but let's just look at this, because I had some people who kind of came at me on Twitter on this, who, because I've been a Kyler defender, like, they're like, oh, see, I guess he's not ready. And they're taking this game and saying, see, he's just, I guess y'all were premature and whatever, anointing him. I'm like, I've been watching him all the time, and my support for him is based on the arm talent and what I've seen over the years and what I see in this offense. And this is one bad game, but let's look at some comparisons here. And so just kind of put this into perspective. Let's look at the quarterback that he just lost to, okay, for the first 3 weeks. So here's Kyler's first 3 weeks, right? Okay. Solid grade first week, even though the result wasn't great. Amazing grade week 2, and not a great grade week 3. This is Jared Goff, okay? And Jared Goff's a really good quarterback, right? His first 2 games were worse than Kyler's game. So everyone's talking about this Kyler game like this, with the 58.6 and the 1 big time throw and the 2 turnover worthy throws, as if this was like the worst game ever. And he's like not a top 10 quarterback because of this game alone. It seems like, well, Jared Goff, a guy who, is, depending on who you ask, a lot of people see him as a top 10 quarterback at this point, top 15 for sure. I think he's pretty good overall. like, look at these two games. These two games here, his first two games were worse than Kyler's game, right? Grade wise, 43.2, 49.0, zero big time throws, two turnover worthy, 1 and 2. Like this game, like that's do you see this? Like this is then like this game he won was 73.5 with zero big time throws, one turnover worthy throw. Like Kyler has two games better. His first two games are better than Jared Goff's best game thus far this season. Okay. But let's also look at the passing grades overall. This is the passing grades, right? The top passing grades in the NFL. Okay. Kyler Murray is sixth in the league. Okay. So through 3 weeks. Okay. Like, so you take into account that bad game, he's still the sixth highest rated passer. Okay. Do you get that? Like that's including that game. And then like, look at this. 8 big time throws, 3 turnover worthy throws. He is 2 ahead of anyone else with big time throws. Josh Allen has 6. Now his turnover worthy throws, not the worst. Jalen Hurts, Anthony Richardson, Dak Prescott, Patrick Mahomes has 6. Right? Caleb Williams, Baker Mayfield 5, Kirk Cousins 5, Will Levis 5, CJ Stroud 5, Jared Goff 5. Right? There's some good quarterbacks there that have more turnover worthy plays than Kyler. Matthew Stafford, Trevor Lawrence. Like some of these are players, like players that a lot of people think are top 5, top 10 quarterbacks have more turnover worthy throws than Kyler. So let's take that into perspective, man. Like it was a bad game. But I'm telling you, like a lot of these other quarterbacks, like that people think are really good quarterbacks, have had worse games. We looked at, I mean, I think Joe Burrow hasn't had a horrible game, right? His games have all been better than Kyler, so that's reasonable. But like Josh Allen has been pretty good, so he's probably, let's see, he had a game. No, his games have been good. But let's look. There's a couple other names on here. Let's look at Stroud. Let's look at Lamar Jackson. Let's look at Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes having a slow start, right? Let's look at, Dak Prescott. I mean, these are quarterbacks that a lot of people think is top 10 quarterbacks and probably are. CJ Stroud, okay, he's had better games than Kyler's worst games. Lamar Jackson, he's been fine. But who's this guy? Mahomes, 58-7. That's not a great game. 61-1, right? But we know we know who he is. He's great, right? But he still has bad games. And that's kind of the point here, right? Dak Prescott, that's not great, right? And then after having looked at those, Jared Goff, right? Let's look at Kyler again, right? 75-6, 96-9, and the one bad game here, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is for anyone who's trying to look at that game and say, see, told you, Kyler, it ain't it. I'm like, look at grades from other quarterbacks. Like, look at where he rates. Look at the big time throws turnover. Like this bad game, there are plenty of teams that have had worse games, right? So let's relax a little bit. Yeah. Me waiting for generational talent, Trevor Lawrence, right? Oh my goodness. Like, yeah, I mean, he's not having it. It ain't great for him this year, right? I mean, he had a bad game. This looks very similar to Kyler's, right? So all right. So yeah, let's give Kyler a little bit of room here, right? And not overreact to one bad game. Ant saying Detroit and Buffalo also look like legit defenses right now. So I think we can, get back to running effectively. A pass game will open up. Yeah, those are good defenses. Like Detroit has some dogs on that defense. Hutchinson, right? Yeah. So yeah, Kyler's game wasn't good, but it wasn't as bad as people are making it out to be. But the offense didn't have a great game. You see it. The grades aren't great, right? There's not deep red there, so I guess that's nice, but wasn't great. But let's look at the defense, because I actually think for the defense wasn't perfect, but I think it played reasonably well. Actually really well considering. So right at the top, we see Buddha. We all love Buddha, right? And Buddha had a heck of a game grade-wise. We see Zaven up there with a good game. Des Gardick. Murphy Bunting had a nice game. Thunder, thanks for being here. The run game being shut down had to hurt Kyler's passing game some 100%, right? And that's kind of, I hit on that early on, that I think was a big part of kind of what contributed to this, right? So let's kind of break this up and look at positions, right? And let's go by positions here and kind of get into here and look at this. All right. So let's go ahead and let's start with the secondary. Okay, so Jalen Thompson had an okay game, 63.3. His coverage grade wasn't great. Tackling was really good though. Buddha had an awesome game. Pass rush grade was a little, but that's on 5 plays and he's not an edge rusher, so that's fine, right? What you really need him to do, tackling, run defense, was awesome at. Coverage, he was pretty good. So your safety play was pretty decent there between Jalen and Buddha. We also, Rabbit had 2 snaps, really nothing, those might, I don't know, were those even, they weren't just kneel downs because there's a coverage, but they were nothing to speak of there, right? But so decent play or good play from our safeties. Looking at quarterbacks, Garrett Williams didn't grade particularly well. Run defense, he really struggled on, right? His coverage grade for 3.4 wasn't great. Getting to our other quarterbacks, Max Melton had a really rough game, right? He had a good game last week. This was a rough game, 40.3. Though more of it was on the run defense and the tackling. His coverage grade 51.8 wasn't good, but it wasn't as bad as those areas. But Murphy Bunting had a nice game, right? 68.6, 65.2 coverage, really good in tackling and run defense. So it was nice to see Murphy Bunting have a good game, right? So, the coverage was, the safeties really did a lot of the work, and Murphy Bunting really did a nice job. The other corners struggled a bit. But, again, they didn't give up a ton of, what they gave up passing game, 286 yards, right, to there. So, it wasn't 199 receive total, I guess. So that's taking out the sacks or the 186. So, the grades weren't great, but on defense were for some of the cornerbacks. But overall, they didn't get torched by any stretch, and the safeties did a lot of work there. Looking at the inside linebackers, we got Mac Wilson Jr. He 37.1, didn't have a great coverage grade. He was good in run defense. Wasn't his best game. He has had some really good games for us, but that's it's not horrible there, right? Looking at the other inside linebackers, Papo didn't have a great game on 8 snaps, right? 30.2, actually really bad, really struggled in tackling. Kaiser White, okay, 59.3 was pretty decent tackling, struggled in pass rush, and pretty average everywhere else. Barnes on 8 snaps was average-ish, right? So, the inside linebackers wasn't a great game for them. It wasn't the worst, but it wasn't great. Then we get from there, let's get to the defensive line, and then we'll go to the edge rushers. We'll kind of get the outside linebackers who are really the edge, right? So let's see. Starting here, Justin Jones, and I know it was mentioned earlier by Drew, I think, that the defensive interior line really struggled. And listen, I liked what they did, their approach, bringing in Nichols and Jones for the interior defensive line. These are guys that are pros, have been solid players, but they're struggling, right? And I don't know if that's getting acclimated to the system, if they're having a rough start, what it is, but we're not getting great play out of them right now. And we really need them to do better. So we got Jones, 25-1. That was really bad, right? Really bad game for him. Collier, 41.0. Nichols, 41.5. That's not good, right? Now we have gotten some good play out of these 2 guys off and on, right? Tonga and Lopez. These guys have been, this week Tonga had the better game with 67.7. Lopez, 53.9 isn't great. But these 2 have been better than the other 2 defensive linemen. But we need to see overall that unit get better. Dante Stills, I think I think he might have been inactive last week. If I'm not mistaken, someone correct me if I'm wrong. And he's been kind of quiet. He's kind of been relegated to a backup. It was nice to see him get some play. 30 snaps, 62.5. He was one of the better defensive linemen that we had, right? In this game, and he got that sack, which was nice, right? So hopefully we see him he can hopefully help improve the play of that unit, right? Now, getting to the outside linebackers, right, and the edge rushers. Xavier Thomas, rookie, continues to struggle, 35.7 grade. His tackling was decent, but coverage and pass rush, run defense, not so great. He's struggling, right? But he's a rookie, so you kind of expect that. But we're hoping he can develop and we can get something more out of him. Gardeck had a nice game. That coverage grade on 3 snaps of 86. Obviously, that interception was super nice, right? So we had a nice game from him, right? Only had one pressure. Would like to see more, but pass rushing is kind of hot and cold, right? But Gardeck continues to be one of the better players there. Julian Okwara, guy that we picked up, had a nice game. 26 snaps, 67.3 grade. Didn't have any pressure, so he was more in the tackling side of things. But, nice play there for him. Let's get a couple of comments real quick. Drew saying both defenses were hitting the crap out of each other for 6 minutes. It was great to see the level of physicality for 4 quarters. Yeah. Murphy Bunting struggled with tackling last week, so it was nice to see, him get an 80 on that. Drew saying, I really want to see Stills get some more reps. 100% agree. Nice to see him out there and get that sack. I want to see more from him. He was so promising last year. Yes, inactive for week 2 has some quality pressures. Yeah. And then, Ant saying we paid a decent amount for Justin Jones Nichols, so hopefully they get it together 100%. I mean, we need them to kind of be more solid and help, get this interior defensive line more on track, right? Let's see. I missed Starling Thomas talking about the cornerbacks, didn't I? He had an okay game, right? This is a very Starling Thomas game, right around 60, right? Not getting his grades are never, it seems like he never has super low grades. It seems like, look at this, 57.3, his coverage 54.8 first week, then better last week. This seems to be very much what he does, right? He's not often like your best graded guy, but he doesn't seem to have a lot of those orange grade games, right? So, but anyway, going back to the edge rushers, Zaven Collins, right? Zaven Collins had a really nice game, especially run defense, right? And tackling. Not so much in the pass rush. We've talked about that before. His coverage was okay, right? On three snaps. Had 2 pressures though, so that's nice. But Zaven Collins has continued to be a solid player, and I think someone shared this in the Discord that he's like amongst edge rushers that has the highest run defense grade. I think someone said, which is nice. And he can be good in coverage, right? He's capable of doing that. It's the pass rush. He got a sack and he's got some pressures, and I know there was one that was taken away, but would like to see those grades improve because to show that he's more consistently getting good pressure. But listen, he's been a solid player for 77.3 grade overall in the season. So, Zaven is a good football player. Is he in the right role? Well, I mean, I guess, the defensive coaches, I'm going to trust they know what they're doing with their scheme. I know there've been a lot of questions about that, but he is a good football player and he's been really good for us. So that, he's kind of a core piece of what they're doing here. So, the defensive grades was a lot more hot or cold. We had some really low grades, right? Especially on the defensive front, but had some higher grades compared to the offense. Let's get a couple more comments here. Starling isn't bad for a waiver pickup, but absolutely for a guy they picked up on waiver, or he was a undrafted free agent. He's been solid, to be an undrafted free agent and start, even if you're not a high-end starter, right? And, he's getting good, valuable reps. And, you would hope guys like Max Melton take that starting job. And Keitrell Clark, you would hope kind of, shows, kind of gets back into good favor. But to have a guy like him, even if he doesn't end up being a starter long-term, to have a guy like him as a backup, even as a depth piece would be really nice. Right. And, I think we all would like to see Max Melton take the reins on that starting job, but it's nice to know we've got a guy like Starling that we can depend on if there's an injury down, in the future, right? For now he's starting, but down the road, we'd probably prefer he be sort of that backup. Drew saying, outside of the pipe dream of Reddick, I'd keep an eye on Jacksonville, Tennessee, or Cincinnati, Tennessee. If they decide to blow it up, Trayvon Walker, Trey Hendrickson, Harold Landry, names that could add pass rush help. Be interesting to see. I mean, I think Monty is really trying to build this to the draft, but if this team is making a playoff run, if they're looking like they're in that position, I could see something like that, right? So we'll see. Yeah. Um, I I've been kind of more historically on the let's build through the draft and let the guys develop and take it slow, and and in terms of not just going and trying to go after free agents, but let's develop our guys and let them become those guys for us. But I'm a little more moved by the idea of maybe Reddick. I mean, I think I just wonder, like, a good pass rusher might really change this. Like, this defense is holding their own without consistently great pass rushers. They get, Gardeck's done it for them a bit here and there, but if they brought in a legit pass rusher with how they've been playing, that could really make a big difference. So, um, Dana saying when Chris Tonga knows your best grade pass rusher for the game. Yeah, that's not great, I guess, right? Yeah. Drew saying what's even more frustrating is 3 guys above league average for pressure rate are all NFC West: Cooper, Mafe for Seattle versus for D-Rob coming back next week. Here's hoping, right? And listen, again, he's a rookie, so we might want to temper expectations at the gate, but he's a first round pick, and they liked what they were seeing from him. So he could definitely make a huge difference, right? At a place where they need it, right? Ant saying at least we have good, our young defense with room to develop instead of aging vets. Yeah, absolutely. Like, this is the right way to build. You build through the draft, you get those guys, you play them, you maybe get a few free agents in there to supplement, but you try to build your guys, in house. And I think an edge rusher in round 1 next year has to be on the table. But also remember, next year Robinson will be in year 2. Ojulari is coming back. And so I think there's going to be some guys, and then they're going to add to that. So the future is very bright. But right now the edge rush is rough. Yeah. Let's real quick look at Detroit's grades. We're not going to spend a lot of time there, but I want to point this out. Their offensive line had a nice game, right? Pass blocking, Ragnow had a little bit of a rough game. Zeitler run blocking, but overall, I mean, Detroit has, arguably the best offensive line in football, right there, right? So, that certainly mattered, right? That made that's a tough group to go against, right? Their tight end Laporta had a nice game, right? St. Raw, nice game. Montgomery, Jared Goff, his best game of the year. We talked about that. Gibbs, right? Their offensive grades are pretty good. Their defensive grades, Hutchinson, right? Well, he's a beast. Kirby Joseph, the strong safety, had a nice game. DJ Reader, nose tackle. Jack Campbell, the linebacker, right? Some nice grades. Down at the bottom, they had a little bit of rough grades here and there. Not going to get too in depth, right? But they had some nice grades overall, but more so on offense, I think. But but let's look at the Cardinals lineup, right? This is where I like to kind of end things at and look at where they're at now. Now they've got Beecham back in there, so hopefully he's starting with the greatest 6. Like, look at how pretty that is. So much more green and even a little bit of bluish green, and like no orange, bright orange or red to be seen. Like this is just kind of just a visual representation of just how much better this team has gotten than last year. Because when we would look at this last year, that offensive line would have some some bright oranges and some not nearly as many good greens, and you just had more yellows and oranges, and you see a lot. It's just, that is a pretty balanced, right, set of grades there. So like that is really encouraging. Now the defensive side needs some work, right? We still got some reds, but it's getting there. Like you got, Baker, Garda, Collins graded pretty well, but that this is kind of the base. There's still some oranges. It's, it's not where you want it to be. You go into the nickel, that brings in the nickel corner, right? You see those defensive linemen's not great. So the defensive side, yeah, there's some more work to be done there, right? For sure. But but this offensive side, it's just so pretty, right? Like that's a really nice looking set of grades. I know it's only 3 weeks in, but like this team is getting there. There's progress. I feel like the plan is working. And again, this is year 2, right? So I feel like they're at least on schedule, if not ahead of schedule, for the rebuild. From what we're seeing, let's get a couple comments before we get out of here. Let's see. Jones maybe for the season with that. You're talking about Jones. Which Jones are we talking about? I don't know. Okay. Anyway, Brett Jones here. That's not Jones that you're talking about, but D-line, no matter what in the draft, yeah, gotta fix that, right? I think edge, you go edge early, in interior defensive line, you continue to build, but you get those guys. You can get good defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen on day 2. Justin Jones injured. Okay, thank you. All right, so I didn't catch that. Okay, he hasn't played well, but yeah, thank you, appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for giving me that. 4 first rounders on their offensive line. I think so. We can go look at the Detroit Lions, and we can go look at their roster, and it'll tell you where they were drafted, right? So here we've got round and pick. Okay, so going down here, first round, we got Frank Ragnow, first round, right? Zeitler is a former first rounder. Decker and Sewell, yep, 4 first rounders, right? And then the third rounder in Glasgow, right? So now a lot of those guys drafted for other teams, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have that on the screen. I'm looking at this, and like you all talking about, like you can see it. Frank Ragnow, first round pick, right? Zeitler, first round pick. Taylor, Decker, and Penei Sewell, first round picks, third round pick for Glasgow, right? So a lot of good draft capital in that offensive line, though some of those guys were drafted elsewhere by other teams, but yeah. So yeah. All right. So a couple other comments. Our problem this week is Commanders wide receiver Terry McLaurin. I want us to take him out. I think in the draft, I think it was 3 years ago, absolute steal in third round. Now, McLaurin's a great player. He's struggled so far this year, and this last week was I know this because he's on one of my fantasy teams, and he had a good week finally. But we did a decent job against, Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't destroy us, and he's a really good receiver. But, so far we've managed not to get totally torched, but, we'll see. That's definitely a guy you got to watch out for, right? Let's see. We brought in 4 no-name defensive linemen for a workout. I saw that on Twitter. Yep. I think Tonga got hurt too, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, hope not. All right. So there it is. The grades obviously reflect that it wasn't as good of a game as last week, but it wasn't as bad as some people made it out to be. I'm still encouraged about where they're going and what they're building. The Lions are a good team. Buffalo's a good team. But listen, we're year 2 of a rebuild. We got to see where they're at. Washington's going to be a big test for us now. And there's some tough games coming up. So, I'm still feel really excited about what they're building, whether they get to the playoffs this year or it's next year. I think they're building it the right way. So that's what we got for this week's Making the Grade. I appreciate everyone who's been here, all the comments in the chat. Thank you all for being part of this conversation that we have. I am going to put up the shout outs for the channel members and get the song going, and we're going to get out of here. So thanks everyone. Have a great Tuesday night. Take care. Peace.